So our purpose for this panel conversation, and we're going to have each of our presenters come to the podium for best visibility for you, is to really kind of go through the Florida side of this from both the research perspective and the implementation perspective. We're going to leave ample time for some questions from the floor. But I'm going to frame this in just two ways very quickly. One is demographics, and I know you've heard this story before, but the word number does begin NUMB, so I'm going to try not to numb you with this number. So we've got 6 million Floridians over age 50, and we have 6 million Floridians under age 25. It's perfectly symmetrical. 1% of 6 million is 60,000. 4 hours a week by 1% of our over 60s is 6 million hours. Now just capture that in your mind. I know a million's a lot, a million's 1,000 thousands, you know all that stuff. But imagine what we could do to leverage 6 million hours across the generations. And of course, like most bridges, it's a two-way bridge. 6 million hours from under 25s in benefit to our over 50s and over 60s and over 70s, and of course, the other way around. So the generation-to-generation movement marks plea for recognizing that there are challenges, but there are solutions demographically in Florida. And by the way, I just said 1%. I say that, and people say, why just 1%? I go, let's get started with 1%. And then we go to 2, then we go to 4, and maybe we'll get up to 10. But it's an amazing piece of, I think, demographic inspiration. I hope so. The other key point I want to make is politics. Florida is the only state in the nation that has special taxing districts whose proceeds go for the benefit of children. We call them generically Children's Service Councils. We have 8 of them. We have 5 of our largest 7 counties have them, so that's Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, Hillsborough, and Pinellas. Pinellas was formed in 1946, so they're in their 71st anniversary. When we do a demographic analysis, these are people going to the voting booth and in the secrecy of the voting booth saying, yes, tax me more to benefit children. And it's property tax, which is the most equitable tax, by the way. It's not sales tax. 5 of those counties, through legislation, had to go back to ballot in 2014, very recently, just a few years ago, for reauthorization because there was a senator who thought, well, maybe they should be more accountable to their people. Of the 5 counties that went to ballot, the lowest majority of the 5 was 74% yes, and 1 county voted 85% yes. So when given the opportunity, our voters reauthorized these taxes. By the way, the take this year is $380 million in total of these 8 counties investing in children's programs. When we did a precinct analysis, and this will be my last point, so buckle up. When we did a precinct analysis of who voted yes, it was the over 50s. The over 50s got the message, the legacy message that Mark articulately laid out for us, that they wanted to be remembered by taking care of kids. And of course, it wasn't usually their own kids. So that's a Florida political story to say that if you don't think that our over 50s, over 60s, over 70s, over 80s would want to invest in children, you'd be wrong. The right story is properly approached, properly integrated, and of course, the more we put older people with younger people, the more personal it becomes, so it's not just policy or politics. In that context of introduction, we've got 3 wonderful friends of ours who each will take the podium in sequence, share with you for a bit about what their perspective is on this great topic, and then we'll open it back up to you. And our first is Dawn Carr. And you'll do a self-introduction, Dawn, is that okay?
Hi, it's a pleasure to have a chance to talk about this subject, and I'm not going to be as good. I'll just put that out there. My name is Dawn Carr. I'm an assistant professor in the sociology department at Florida State University and a faculty associate at the Pepper Institute on Aging and Social Policy. Jack gave us some marching orders, and he asked us to please describe 3 things that we know that you don't know and should know. So I don't know what you know, but I'm gonna tell you some things that I want to make sure you know. My research, I'm a gerontologist by training. My research has focused almost exclusively on the 3 things that I think are really important, and that is workforce engagement in later life, paid work and the retirement process, volunteer engagement, and care work. Of all of these things, the thing that has captured my attention the most and has been most shocking to me relates largely to volunteer engagement. And this is how I became interested in being here today, is particularly around the potential opportunity that exists. And I think Florida, I mean, when I've lived in Florida now, I think 15 months, so I'm a newbie to Florida, and I don't know all the wonderful things yet, but I'm learning from all of you. But one of the things that's quite phenomenal about volunteer engagement is that, as great as it sounds, and I continue to study this with great interest, as great as it sounds for society, it's phenomenally beneficial to the people who engage in it. I continue to do research trying to find out what I can know about how volunteering influences those who volunteer. And one of the things that we find is that every time I try to better understand volunteering, I try to prove wrong. It must just be an artifact of selection or some other problem. I keep finding not only is it not an artifact of selection, it's in fact more beneficial than I even imagine. People who volunteer benefit through delayed onset of disability. They're less depressed, they're less lonely, they're more engaged in their community and are able to cultivate greater sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. So, and I study older people, and by older, and don't take this personally, I study people over 50. People over 50 are unique in lots of ways, but volunteering is well suited for people over 50. It turns out when we study volunteering, it's something that we increasingly view as a health behavior. So instead of thinking about giving back to the community as something that's nice, that's good for helping everybody get along, it's actually a public health issue. And I think it needs to be thought of that way. The evidence is profound. It's as beneficial for people as exercise, as eating well, as not smoking, as we've heard a lot about these last 2 days. This is something that I think should be taken very seriously and can be recognized this way. If we're interested in delaying onset of disability and the needs for long-term care, and our state definitely has to think about these things, this is a pathway to offsetting and delaying that disability, and is a financial incentive for us as well. So that's the first thing that I think is important to point out. The other thing, which I think is abundantly clear, and I'm certainly not the expert here, is that young people who have somebody who's irrationally crazy about them, they benefit in ways that can modify what we know is the period in history, perhaps, with the greatest level of inequality among young people. We have huge amounts of inequality, huge amounts of young people who are facing problems, and this is also an economic issue. We have young people who are, if there isn't an intervention, we're not going to have a future that allows them to be productive citizens. And so it is our duty, our mandate, I think, to help identify pathways to uplift young people who are facing these challenges. And I think these days, with all the opioid kinds of things, it's all over the news, this isn't a surprising thing. we're probably facing a time in history when there hasn't ever been a better time to think about ways that we can involve older people in the lives of young people. They'll benefit greatly, and our future depends on making sure that young people are able to grow up and be productive members of society who can continue to do great things. So that's the second aspects of how volunteering is good for people. But the last way that volunteering is good for people is through communities. And again, social cohesion is often something that I think academics throw around. But one of my favorite researchers on the subject, Mario Smalley, he's a sociologist at Harvard now, has done this phenomenal research looking at the value that is provided to people who volunteer, who have mentors, young people who have mentors. And one of the main sort of explanations he has is that the people who have these non-parental adults in their lives are able to become better citizens because they're able to kind of have this meaning and purpose that they cultivate, especially during this really critical early period of life in early adolescence. And those people go on to be better contributors. Social cohesion is something that is sort of the outcome of these kinds of relationships. We have greater sort of love and respect for our fellow citizens when we start to see that we're important and you're important. And civic engagement, I think, is really the consequence of being able to engage in a community where we see that the greater whole is more important than any individual. So the second point I want to make is really, I'll do less well at this than Mark, but generativity. Older people are, yes, they have plenty of time on their hands. This is important. And that's one factor. This is a growing time bank. We have lots of older people with lots more time on their hands because they're not engaged in workforce. I don't think this will continue, by the way. You know, lots of people are going to need to continue in paid work, at least part-time. But another factor, whether engaged in paid work or not, older people have unique abilities. So as we get older, it's not that, oh, we have these people available, we should use them. In fact, they are the perfect person, the perfect group of people to solve some of these problems. They, as a consequence of getting older, we have this drive, a natural consequence of aging involved as part of our development, a need to give back to others. There is a small group of people, I think 10%, who generally don't see this drive, but for the vast majority of people, generativity is part of what we feel as we age. And this drive to give back needs to be met with sort of an opportunity to fulfill that developmental stage to some degree. But on top of that, as we get older, we're more capable of seeing the bigger picture. We're better at managing conflict. We're able to sort of see the potential opportunities for taking a step back and thinking about the bigger picture. Older people are perfectly designed as mentors. The last thing that I want to talk about, and this is the opportunity for Florida, I think, is people don't sort of randomly walk up to young people and say, hey, can I help you out, right? There has to be an opportunity, an institutional circumstance that allows these things to happen. So in order for these things to occur, we actually have to have serious intention. We have to decide it's important, we have to develop programs, we have to fund those programs, and we have to be able to match the right people together in the right circumstance. And this is where we are now, I think, is at a place where we need to be thinking about how can we do this better. I have ideas, if you want to come and talk to me, about some things that we could do, and I'd love to be able to start thinking about them. But as a group, I think this is really where we need to be, is being very thoughtful about how do we do this in the best possible circumstances that facilitates success. So thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. This is an admission of under-exaggeration. Is there such a thing as under-exaggeration? Maybe overstatement. the opposite. So I gave you a wrong number. I under-exaggerated. 60,000 at 4 hours a week, which is 200 hours a year, is not 6 million hours, it's 12 million hours. I feel like the guy on the commercial saying, but wait!
There's more.
2 for 1. So anybody who took notes on those numbers, as I went through them, it's 12 million hours. I also wanted to pay recognition before I bring up our next speaker to a gentleman who is really bridging not only the age gap, but the sector gap in this room. It's Tony Carvajal with the Florida Chamber Foundation. Tony is doing a fabulous job with the Florida Chamber Foundation of bridging from the business sector to the early childhood investment sector. So that's another example of recognizing that the more you learn, the more you can invest in the younger child and pay dividends. Is that the correct word, Tony? Long-term dividends. Thank you so much. Kathy Black is next. Please join me in welcoming Kathy Black.
Hi again, everybody. Kathy Black, University of South Florida, Sarasota, Manatee. And I'm here to talk about age-friendly communities as an opportunity. For those of you who, are people familiar with age-friendly communities? Okay, so some people are. So just really quickly, it really is a global movement. It started in 2005 from the World Health Organization. In 2011 or 2012, AARP joined in with their Livable Communities movement, which is very aligned. There are over 500 global communities, over 200 in the nation, and 16 and growing in Florida. It's really about promoting active, healthy, and engaged living throughout the life course for people at all life stages and abilities. And it recognizes the role of community features, particularly the built environment, housing, outdoor spaces, and transportation, as well as social features. And here's where civic engagement comes in, which is really mobilizing the social, civic, and intellectual capital of people, in some cases spending more years in retirement than their working lives. So the work is a 5-year process when a community signs up, and it has to be a municipality that signs in. And what it does is you look at your local community. What are our assets? Because after all, this is where people live and work and play. What are our assets, and what are the aspirations of people in those communities? And so the first point for me is the opportunity of age-friendly communities and the alignment at this movement at this time. And the second thing that I want to talk about is really the diversity of the aging experience. You know, I continue to hear about aging almost as a monolithic group, like we can get seniors to do this. But I want to tell you a little bit about what we found in our work. So we surveyed and interviewed about 1,200 people. It was not probability sampling. It was not, although we did have people from every zip code, 27 zip codes in Sarasota County. There's about 390,000 people in the county. And we interviewed people between ages 50 and 98. And that's about a 50-year span. And so as you can see, you saw the numbers that we put up. We've got people who are young older, middle-age older, old, all kinds of terms coming. We've got centenarians. So we've got great diversity there. And so let me give you an example. At one of the, I was at a volunteer recruitment effort in Sarasota the other day, and they had 14 agencies, and one was moms helping moms. It was for domestic violence, and they told me about a 68-year-old woman that comes to help out, and she brings her 95-year-old mother with her because she's a caregiver, and the mother helps sort hangers and does other things. And I think that is a wake-up call for the organizations about modifying your abilities, because people at all ages cannot necessarily do everything. We met with Habitat for Humanity. They have about 1,000 volunteers in Sarasota, and they are one wonderful brand around this world, and they've got a lot of people everywhere. Well, they have very quietly, people, at least in Sarasota County, people over age 80 are not really allowed above the 5th step of a ladder, and that's a good idea. And they're not allowed to do roof work anymore either. And by the way, many people still want to do it, but they have set some limits. So I think it's very important that we consider altering and meeting some of the needs of people at all stages and abilities. Some of the other diversity points, you know, I just want to go back to the gender piece as well. Again, it is loud and clear in our community. Women particularly are very, very vulnerable. Florida scam central. And there's a lot of distrust, and people are really reluctant. We tried at our school to, with our lifelong learning program, have some of the older lifelong learners connect with some of the students, and I have to tell you, a lot of the lifelong learners reluctant to give out their emails, don't want their phone numbers. We even talked about the ideas of pseudonyms. So this issue, and I think, again, the core of that is dialogue and understanding, but it also speaks to the larger, macrocosm that we're living under. Socioeconomic variability. We had people who want to volunteer. They're worried about whether they're going to be living in a tent tomorrow. These are some real issues. The boomers, I have to tell you, very much still in the workforce. They know they need to work to finance those later years. So that's a very real issue with them. We heard a lot of issues on cost, even for some of our fairly, we thought, well-to-do people, but they can't afford the mileage, the fuel, the driving, the parking fees. We had people tell us that they wanted to volunteer at the schools and they could not afford the fingerprinting that was required. We have people with a variety of lifetime experiences, and this is something else we heard loud and clear, and I had to face this one because I was like you, Jack, why can't people just give their time? You should see all the lifelong learning that's going on. People who are spending enormous amounts of time and energy for self-pursuit, and it's all good because we're glad to see people stay active, healthy, engaged mentally, cognitively, socially, spiritually, and wondering whether can some of that be dialed into the civic realm. And people will tell us, I did the PTA thing. I worked 40 years. This is my time. And so we wish we could dial some of that over, but people are where they're at. In some cases, when you look at an organization, they want to build organizational capacity. But people told us that they want, they found a newfound skill. Now they're in their 70s and they wanted to be a cat person. They want to care for cats. We have dozens and dozens of cat rescue shelters in Sarasota County with tremendous energy going to pets, I have to tell you, in our state. Lots of people spending their efforts with arts and going to the entertainment venues in part to see the shows for free and to benefit from all of that fun fare that they would otherwise not be able to afford to do. We also heard a lot about life circumstances, people who wanted to volunteer, including people who've maybe been to Rotary members or Kiwanis members their whole lives. Now they can't because of their own health issues or because of their caregiving responsibilities. So I don't think that we're talking enough about the diversity and meeting the needs of people in reduced or different abilities to volunteer. Of course, the community features were loud and clear. The transportation was a huge issue for many residents in our community. And as Bevan noted yesterday, and I failed to mention, communication information, people don't know where to go to get information. Then when they find somewhere to go, they get very frustrated because, oh, you need to call back tomorrow or try this or ask for so-and-so. And people get very frustrated and then they stop looking. And so that is a real issue, and we do need to remember reaching people through information. Not everybody's digital in the age groups that we're talking about. I just want to say one last thing about the people coming to Florida. We've got a lot of newcomers. We get people who move here, widows, divorced, retired. These are real opportunities to connect people. And the last key point that I want to make speaks really to sustainability and really a multi-sector role. All of us are stakeholders. Business plays a role. If you value intergenerational, you can incentivize it. There's SCORE, there's mentoring, younger people giving back to older people as far as technological skills. Government in our community, the supervisor of elections, is creating high school students connecting with older adults on election day and in planning for the voting. The nonprofits, you've heard about the daycare in the assisted livings. We're creating more of that. We now have a foster care that's being built, and we're going to be offering free rent to older people, helping them on housing and meaningful life involvement. Community groups can play a big role in connecting. And I think one last comment about the role of media communications. None of this is valuable if people don't know about it. So we need to do more about sharing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. So earlier I mentioned there are 8 counties that have voter-approved taxing districts for children. And our anchor man, our cleanup hitter, Donovan Lee Sin, represents one of them, which is the Children's Trust of Miami-Dade County. By the way, their budget this year, property tax revenue, is approximately $120 million. So if you have any relations in Miami-Dade, you want to know this man. The head of public policy and community engagement, Donovan Leeson.
Good morning. Good morning. Happy to see you all. Thanks for having me. And Jack, thank you for allowing me to join the crew this morning. I'm going to break from the mold just a bit, and I have a few slides, a little bit more than a few, but Jack said keep it brief, so I will. As Bob sets up the slides, I just want to say a couple of things about the story. And you'll see a lot of photos in this slideshow. It'll go quite quickly, but one of the things I want to mention that is kind of the underbelly of this work is that all of these photos were taken by seniors. The story of Riverside Park is the classic tale of use versus misuse, right? And on the left, you'll see here, this is what you would see on a typical day 3 years ago in Riverside Park. Someone drinking or smoking or doing whatever else under a sign that says no smoking or drinking here. What you'll also see as we got into this work and we spoke with families and parents, and they're saying, well, this is not a safe place for me to be. This is not a safe place for me or my family. And then we took a closer look at the demographics of the neighborhood and found out that within a mile of this park that was under really crazy ill use, that there were 13,000 kids living there. And along with them, there were another nearly 5,000 seniors. But still, you go to the park and you'd have guys walk up and say, well, can I drink my beer here? And we went to a meeting held by the police department, the new police commander who had this community meeting to introduce himself, and he's going to be tough on crime, this, blah, everything you'd hear at a meeting like that. And this really, I thought, frail older lady in the back said, fix the park. And, she rallied the crowd, and there was almost, like this march on the park. And, so we got to investigating and spending some time with her to have a deeper understanding. And then we rallied some citizens, including youth, and we did a community survey. And we had kids chaperoned by the community elders to survey about 300 households around the neighborhood to figure out what their concerns were of the park, what they thought they would be able to do personally to fix it, and if they were willing to put some sweat in to work with us. And these are the first words that came to their mind when they thought about the park. It's dangerous, it's not for me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But also we asked, well, what would you like to see at the park? And the kids said sports, arts, this, that, and the other. Parents and seniors said, we want a farmer's market. We want movies in the park. We want this to be a place where they can do yoga. And, some of the more active adults said they wanted Zumba and all these other things. But the most incredible part of this survey was that 74% of the respondents said they're willing and personally to do something deliberate to change the dynamics around this park. And you're saying, well, what's so bad about this park? This is a park where folks were murdered there on Christmas Day. Right? And so that's the atmosphere. It was in total disuse, misrepair. And after assembling and gathering data and actually charting a plan of how to work on this with seniors, and a group of seniors, 7 seniors made up this core group, 7 parents and 7 kids. And they rallied all of the community members around them. What we've seen is increased use, both informal and formal, along with capital improvements and bringing existing programming to the park. 2 years ago when we started this project, if you Googled Riverside Park, you'd get a picture of a bandit, no lie. Picture of a bandit that says no smoking, drinking, or alcohol here. And those were the pictures along the perimeter of the park where everybody was smoking and drinking. Now, if you Google the park, what comes up are these images of kids playing, families having some time together, and really feeling a sense of community ownership. Altogether, this group of 21 has made it possible to bring together the city police, municipal, other municipal agents, local businesses, and others to do this work. And, to talk about kind of the three things, and I'm wrapping up here, I just wanted to give you just the imagery and the background story, is that the harsh reality is that the stew of diversity that we all brag about as Floridians, South Floridians, Miamians, it's also fit with lush trimmings of social, cultural, and age isolation and disconnection, right? And what we've learned through this it took us 18 months, really, from misuse to community value. In its simplest form is that we need each other, and that our agents of change are our youth, their parents, and our elders. That combination is incredibly powerful. And we, in a deeper recognition and somewhat selfishly, right? My grandparents both passed away they were 99 and 98, grandfather and grandmother. My retired parents, looks like they're going to be charting that path. So selfishly, I'm charting my own use and my own value in this work in ensuring that my efforts aren't sidelined and my parents' efforts aren't sidelined, my grandparents' efforts aren't sidelined. So with that, I'm coming to a close here, but with that, what I want to say is this has been a wonderful experiment in Little Havana in Miami. We have 7 other similar projects in their kind of midpoint of launch. This one was particularly focused around a park. We have one focused around grade level reading, where we have seniors and other youth helping kids in the early grades to improve their reading levels. And so I'm happy to answer any questions after this or about our continued work in this space. But this was just kind of a teaser of the impact, I think, of this work coming together between having real intergenerational collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Okay, our great leader, Bob Jones, is giving me the eye, so I know what that means. That means that he is the man with the mic. We have a few minutes for any comments or questions, and then we'll do a very short closing statement before we go to break. So
yes, and I'll just say one more thing about Donovan's presentation. In Miami in December 2016, we had a one-day summit, and Children's Trust was supportive of that, Allegheny and others. We had 23 sponsors in the end for that. And this example, the showcase, was presented there as well, and it was very well received. So thank you, Donovan.
Okay,
so,
anybody with a question or comment, time is yours. Oh,
okay, Steve.
Steve, you're up. Steve, would you rise and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Mark. That was prophetic and profound. Poetic and profound. You set them up well. So, I'm Steve Mills. I'm at FSU at the Center for Leadership and Social Change. I'm going to kind of wade into this question. It is related to the intersection of race and age. So, I know that there's a lot of sort of suspicion in America of the older generation having kind of missed the growing awareness of some of the struggles of black and brown citizens in this country, either missed it or resist it. And I know that a lot of the mentoring that happens in America is across race, particularly white mentors mentoring black and brown youth. I know that I have several friends that are in the sort of the matching game in mentoring organizations. And they always tell me that their waiting list is just filled primarily with white women. And they also tell me, some of them believe that the mentoring relationship transcends everything. And some of them are really careful to match according, particularly to race and gender, not so much age. But I know if I was a family and I had a black or brown child, and I know that I had an older white mentor, I'd probably have some concerns, or I'd wonder about the training that maybe that mentoring has had, or their general awareness. I'd be worried, I think, a little bit about them stubbornly believing, you know, in the meritocracy and the American dream in some way that I don't know, belittles my family and my community. And so I just wanted to throw that out there and just see what thoughts you might have about that.
Okay, I'm going to ask for a volunteer from our panel, but Steve, if I may expand the question, if I have permission. I'm not sure it's solely about race. I think we're talking about culture and sometimes class in terms of, you're talking about race. Okay, gotcha. Anybody want to hit that one? Donovan?
I will try. In our work, what we found is that because we've focused mainly on an issue that is rooted in a community, not with a person or people, that we've not deliberately tried to match up folks according to race, experience, or any of that, but really focused around the issue. And what we found from our elder advisors in this work is that it's a learning experience for them as well. They're particularly eye-opening experience if they're from one part of Miami and trying to help or steward some kind of project in another part, is that you know, they start to recognize the isolation that they have, that both parties have lived in over time. And so that experience, that learning experience has really been to the benefit of what we've been able to do in some of these projects, because they've brought other relationships and networks to the table that would not probably not be there if not for this diverse type of experience.
Anybody else?
Okay,
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we got two here, and then with these two, then we'll go to a break.
Hi, very quickly. Donovan, you mentioned that the kids did the surveying and had an adult chaperone in the area.
Yes, they had a senior.
Okay, that's great. Whose idea was that, or kind of how did you kind of generate that? Because that seems like in and of itself a really great activity for young people and adults to be involved in, is the data gathering component.
It was both deliberate and happenstance. So we wanted to know more about the community in order to get this plan of how we would move from A to B. And the seniors were the ones, you know, we wanted youth to do some of the surveying itself and ask the questions. Because we wanted them to get a better sense of community ownership and knowing a little bit more about who lives with them and around them. And the seniors in the group basically said, we will be in charge of getting the chaperones. You know, they assembled a crew of, I believe it was nearly 60 seniors from the neighborhood. And, you know, they walked block to block on a Saturday morning with these kids. And, you know, the value, that interaction between the youth and our, we call them our senior advisors, really started to make things gel.
And Donovan is listed in our participant roster, so more information can come from Donovan. Please, would you rise and identify yourself?
Jay Thompson with the College of Central Florida. I hope you don't mind me asking a question that's a little bit different than what you've been talking about. When I was looking at the numbers, it looked, if I crunch them right, it looks like we have 43% of the state's population is under the age of 36. When we hear a lot about Florida politics, you know, and our civics being, you know, geared towards the older population, which Florida's always had a disproportionate number of, but that's a rather large number, and I was curious, with this now what I would guess to be a fairly young population, one, where does that put Florida overall in terms of, you know, our share of population that's under the age of 40, and how is that affecting the Florida's politics and society?
Ooh, that's a big one, especially coming into an election year. I'm going to take a crack at that, and we can certainly go to our panel for this last one. We've got a lot of everybody. So by proportion, we are second oldest after West Virginia. I think that's our latest data. But by volume, we've got so many. We basically have 1 million every 4 years. So we have 1 million 0 to 4s, we have 1 million 5 to 9s, you keep going up, and then over 85, another million. We have 300,000 over 85-year-old drivers. Not to scare anybody, but just to let you know. So Florida is this amazing amalgam of multi-generational, and you are at the edge in Marion County of a community that has 114,000 residents and growing called the Villages. So we know there are geographical hubs of over 50s, over 60s, and over 70s, but we have an enormous population of everyone. What surprises people is we have 1 million more under 18s than we do over 65s. So we are lots of young, lots of middle, lots of old, and growing. Okay, we're going to thank Eric for his wonderful presentation on veteran involvement. We are going to thank our 3 panel members, and of course, the expertise is you've only touched the surface. And now, as the closing benediction of 4-line Advocates Credo, please follow me. Thou art my child, my parent, and my elder. I love thee best, but could not love thee half as much, loved I not all the rest. It's a judgment we make, whether we're going to measure the love we have for our own, however you define that, by that which we do for others. Thank you very much.
Okay.